She was just a quiet, reserved black student, struggling to fit in at her new school, but it was her gentleness and differences that made her the perfect target for a group of wealthy, arrogant, and ruthless students, those who found twisted joy in the pain of others. They relentlessly tormented, humiliated, and isolated her, confident that no one could touch them with their family's power and status. But they made a fatal mistake. They had no idea who her father was. A brief phone call was made, and the unimaginable happened. An FBI helicopter descended onto the school grounds, leaving everyone in shock. In that moment, the bullies realized that sometimes silence holds a terrifying power. Aaliyah Carter was sitting quietly in the familiar car driven by her mother. The road leading into Asheville, a small town in North Carolina, appeared peaceful but unfamiliar. This wasn't the first time the 13-year-old had moved, but each time left her heart tight with anxiety and unease. Sitting next to Aaliyah was Monica Carter, her mother, a strong yet gentle woman who always carried a subtle look of worry on her face. Monica was an excellent nurse who had recently been reassigned to the local hospital, a decision made not by choice, but out of necessity. Aaliyah understood this, never blaming her mother, but deep inside she could feel the loneliness creeping in from the constant moves. Her father, James Carter, was a senior FBI agent. His secretive and dangerous work kept him away from home most of the time. Their conversations were brief, rushed calls when he could sneak away from his assignments to hear his daughter's soft voice. Aaliyah had never blamed him, but sometimes she wished, even if just once, she could hold his large hand as she walked into a new school. The car came to a stop in front of Asheville Middle School, a large, clean but cold building. Monica looked at her daughter, trying to smile reassuringly, though her eyes betrayed the worry she carried. "You'll be fine, Aaliyah," she said gently. "Just be yourself, and everything will be okay." Aaliyah nodded quietly, saying nothing more. She opened the car door, stepped out, her new sneakers hitting the unfamiliar ground. Her heart raced. Her breath seemed to catch as she looked toward the school gates where more students were gathering. Laughter and chatter filled the air, but it all felt distant, alien to her. The first step into the school felt like time had stopped. Every eye in the hallway turned toward her, filled with curiosity, scrutiny, and coldness. No one greeted her. Instead, silent gazes followed her every move, heavy with unspoken judgment. It felt as though she had stepped into a territory where outsiders were unwelcome. She walked toward the school office, her heart still pounding. A tall woman with thick glasses and a stern face stood before her, barely sparing a glance. "Aaliyah Carter?" Her voice was indifferent. "Yes," Aaliyah answered quietly, trying to keep calm. "Follow me." The woman led her through long, quiet hallways, with classrooms shut tight on either side. She could feel eyes on her from behind the glass windows, as if judging each step she took. Finally, they stopped in front of a classroom with the door ajar. The woman knocked softly, then entered, her voice cold as she introduced her. "Class, this is the new student, Aaliyah Carter. I hope you'll welcome her." The eyes that met Aaliyah were devoid of warmth, silent and unwelcoming like statues. No smiles, no waves of greeting. Aaliyah swallowed hard, stepped into the room, and chose an empty seat at the back corner. She lowered her head, focusing on her trembling hands. Aaliyah Carter's first day at her new school began like this, full of anxiety, loneliness, and complete isolation. Deep down, she could only hope that this was just a rough start, and that tomorrow would be better. But what she didn't know was that this was just the beginning of a storm she would soon have to face. And what no one in that school realized was that the quiet girl they were trying to isolate was the daughter of a man whose power they could never have imagined, a senior FBI agent who would do anything to protect his daughter. The bell signaling the end of class rang loudly, but the sound was not enough to pull Aaliyah out of the growing loneliness that began to envelop her. As she packed her books into her backpack, she quietly glanced around. The other students quickly gathered in small groups, chatting and laughing as if they didn't even notice her existence. Even the teacher left the classroom indifferently, showing no interest in the new student sitting alone in the corner. Aaliyah took a deep breath, stood up, and slowly made her way out of the classroom. She tried to keep her face calm, but cracks began to form inside her. At the last school she moved to, there had at least been a few gentle smiles, an awkward greeting. But here, at Asheville, everything felt like a frozen lake, silent and emotionless. At lunchtime, Aaliyah stood lost in the bustling cafeteria, her dark eyes scanning for a place to sit. Her gaze landed on a table with a few empty chairs, where two girls were chatting while eating. Gathering all the courage she had, she approached them, her voice soft but shaky. "Hi, can I sit here?" The two girls looked up at her with suspicion, exchanging a glance. One, a blonde girl named Emma, curled her lips into a cold, shallow smile, before responding with just enough politeness to be mocking. "Sorry, this seat's taken." Aaliyah awkwardly looked around, clearly seeing the empty seats in front of her, but quickly understanding the message behind the words. She forced a tight smile and quietly turned to walk away, her heart tightening with each painful step. Finally, she found a secluded spot in the back corner of the cafeteria, where the light was dim and no one seemed to notice her. From her seat, Emma watched Aaliyah and whispered something to Chloe, the brown-haired girl sitting next to her, making Chloe giggle softly. Emma Pierce, who was Brandon Pierce's younger sister and the daughter of the school's principal, had the unshakable confidence that came with her family's status. Every word, every gesture she made had weight, and no student dared to oppose her, even by accident. Emma disliked anyone who didn't fit in with her world, especially someone like Aaliyah, the new girl who stood out in the most awkward, uncomfortable way. To Emma, Asheville Middle School was the private domain of the Pierce family and those like them, people who belonged to the town by birth. Anyone different was considered an outsider, unworthy of being treated like a normal person. Aaliyah tried to eat quickly, but the food today seemed tasteless. She rushed out of the cafeteria and found herself in the quiet library to escape the gazes, accidental or intentional, that seemed to follow her everywhere. But even in this peaceful place, she could feel the weight of isolation. The tall bookshelves and cozy reading corners felt cold and foreign, as if rejecting her presence. The afternoon class wasn't any better. When Aaliyah finally gathered the courage to raise her hand and ask a question in math class, Mr. Jenkins looked at her absently and answered curtly in an impatient tone, his gaze quickly shifting to another student. The feeling of being dismissed felt like a small knife cutting into her heart, gentle but unbearably painful. At the end of the day, on her way to the school gate, Aaliyah accidentally walked past Emma's group again. The whispers were loud enough for her to hear, mixed with the sound of mocking laughter. She lowered her head, trying to walk quickly to escape the situation, but the sting of humiliation followed her relentlessly. The car door opened, and Aaliyah quickly climbed into her seat, slamming the door shut. Monica Carter looked at her daughter and immediately noticed the dark cloud hanging over her face. "How was school today, honey?" she asked. Aaliyah tried to hide her emotions, offering a weak smile and answering in a barely audible voice, "It was fine, Mom. Just a little tired." Monica didn't press further, but inside, her worry deepened. She recognized the smile, Aaliyah only wore that smile when she was hiding something painful. That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed, Aaliyah stared up at the ceiling. The events of the day replayed in her mind over and over again. She had never felt so alone. The cold silence of the people around her, the indifferent eyes of the teacher, and the mocking smiles from Emma and Chloe seemed to prove that she was a nobody, invisible and unimportant. She thought of her father, Special Agent James Carter, the man who always protected her from afar. In moments like this, she just wanted to hear his familiar deep voice, to hear him tell her that everything would be okay. But tonight, the phone remained silent. There were no calls from her father. Perhaps he was still immersed in a secret mission, somewhere far away. In the stillness of the night, Aaliyah squeezed her eyes shut, telling herself that she had to be strong. What she didn't know was that the isolation she felt today was just the first step in a series of brutal challenges she would soon face. And behind Emma Pierce's powerful smiles, there was a deeper darkness, a ruthless plot that was about to be revealed, one that would change everything, forever. The sunlight the next morning filtered through the classroom window, casting a soft, gentle light onto the familiar desk in the corner where Aaliyah usually sat. However, today, that light wasn't warm enough to melt the coldness waiting for her. As she entered the classroom, Aaliyah immediately froze, her gaze locked on the cruel scribble in black ink on her desk. "Go back to where you belong." Her heart tightened, and her throat felt as though it was being strangled by invisible fingers. A feeling of shame and hurt seeped deep into her veins, into every breath she took. She could clearly hear the muffled giggles coming from behind her, but she didn't turn around. She knew exactly who those laughs belonged to. The sharpness of those sounds cut into her heart little by little, making each breath heavier. Aaliyah hurriedly pulled out a tissue from her bag and tried to wipe away the ink, but it was useless. The words were still faintly visible on the desk, like a wound that couldn't be healed. She tried to keep a calm face, pretending not to care, but each cruel stroke of the ink had carved itself deep into her mind. From afar, Emma Pierce watched quietly, her cold blue eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Emma knew she had power, not the kind that came from a title or position, but the kind of power that came from being at the top of this small social hierarchy. In Emma's eyes, Asheville was her perfect little world, and people like Aaliyah were the ones who shattered that perfection. The class began, and the teacher walked in, glancing over Aaliyah's desk with the scribbled words but quickly turning away, as if those words didn't even exist. Aaliyah's heart clenched again, not just because of the bullies, but because of the terrifying silence from those who were supposed to protect her. As Mr. Jenkins started explaining a new math problem on the board, Aaliyah mustered all her courage to raise her hand and ask a question. But as soon as she spoke, the classroom filled with quiet, mocking laughter. Mr. Jenkins looked at her with indifference, his expression full of irritation, and answered curtly, "You should pay more attention, Aaliyah." His words were gentle, but they were like a sharp rebuke that made her feel foolish. She lowered her hand, her face turning red from embarrassment, her eyes focused on the notebook in front of her. Around her, the soft laughter continued, like an undercurrent that pulled away. The little self-respect she had left. The rest of the morning passed in a similar miserable state. Every time she tried to borrow a school supply, people pretended not to hear or avoided her gaze. Everyone around her began to treat her like a ghost, a meaningless existence among the other students. This feeling made her realize that she wasn't just being ignored, she was being deliberately isolated, purposely removed from this small community. At the end of the lesson, Aaliyah sat curled up in the corner of the library, trying to escape the whispers, the disdainful looks, and the mocking smiles. She quietly opened the book in front of her, but she couldn't focus on the words. Her mind kept replaying the events of the day, wondering why her peers treated her this way. She asked herself 100 times, "What did I do wrong?" Across the library, Emma and Chloe sat together, occasionally glancing toward where Aaliyah was sitting. Emma tilted her head, her shiny blonde hair swaying slightly, and a calculated smile crept across her lips. She whispered to Chloe, "Look, she's still there. I thought it would be easier if she just disappeared." Chloe nodded, her eyes filled with admiration for Emma. In the small world of Asheville School, being friends with Emma meant never being the target of bullying. This made Chloe never question whether Emma's actions were right or wrong. For Chloe, safety and status in the group were more important than compassion. The bell signaling the end of class rang once more, and Aaliyah quickly gathered her things and hurried out of the library. On her way out, each step felt like it pulled her further into a harsher reality. She suddenly realized that this isolation wasn't just accidental. It was a deliberate, calculated plot. When she got into her mom's car, Monica immediately noticed the even gloomier expression on her daughter's face than the day before. But Aaliyah just silently stared out the window, hiding the emotions that were bubbling up inside her. That night, lying in her own room, Aaliyah wrote in her journal the painful but resilient words, "They don't know how much it hurts. They think I'm weak, but they're wrong. I won't fall because of their words. I will rise and keep going." In the darkness, she clutched her journal tightly. Yet, deep in her heart, she still felt fear, because she knew that these signs were just the beginning, and the real storm was waiting for her ahead. The next morning, the sunlight still gently filtered through the window as usual, but inside Aaliyah, everything seemed to have lost its warmth. When the lunch bell rang, instead of feeling excited like the other students, her heart was filled only with nervous anticipation and tension. Aaliyah looked down at her tray of food, took a deep breath, and walked into the cafeteria, silently hoping that today wouldn't be as bad as the days before. Her eyes quickly scanned the rows of tables, stopping at a small one with an empty seat where Emma and Chloe were eating and chatting happily. For a moment, she hesitated, but Aaliyah reminded herself that she had to try to fit in. She slowly walked toward the two girls, her voice hesitant as she spoke. "Can I sit here?" Emma stopped her conversation, turned to look at Aaliyah with a cold stare, her lips curling into a slight displeased smirk. Chloe glanced at Emma before also adopting an unfriendly expression. "This seat is taken," Emma replied firmly, even though the seat was clearly empty. Aaliyah felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment and shame, spreading through her body. She knew they were lying, but she also understood that arguing wouldn't change anything right now. Fighting back tears, she nodded quietly, turned around, and quickly walked away, heading to the familiar corner of the cafeteria. She sat down in the cold seat, lowering her head and pretending to focus on eating her sandwich. She didn't want anyone to notice the weakness she was desperately trying to hide. From afar, she could still hear Emma and Chloe's mocking laughter, mixed with curious, cold stares from the nearby tables. From her seat, Emma Pierce occasionally glanced toward Aaliyah. To Emma, Aaliyah was an intruder, someone unworthy of joining the world she had worked so hard to build. Emma had grown up in an environment where everyone admired her, with her father, the principal, protecting her fiercely. She had never had to endure any opposition. For her, excluding people she didn't like was just a game, and right now, the game was aimed squarely at Aaliyah. "Do you think she'll last much longer?" Chloe whispered to Emma, her voice full of curiosity and a hint of excitement. "Not long," Emma replied casually, stirring her orange juice in front of her. "I can tell she's weaker than the others." Chloe smiled in agreement, admiring Emma's cold confidence. No one at the school dared oppose Emma, and she knew that very well. Being close to Emma meant safety, protection. That's why Chloe always happily supported Emma in her pranks, even though sometimes she felt guilty about it. In the corner of the cafeteria, Aaliyah silently chewed her food, trying to ignore the curious, pitying, or contemptuous looks aimed at her. She just wished lunchtime would pass quickly so she could escape this place, but the challenge didn't end there. When she returned to class, Aaliyah opened her backpack to grab her books for the next class, only to find something wet and sticky in the side pocket. She quickly pulled out a crushed apple, smeared with blue ink. Her hands shook as anger and helplessness filled her heart. Around her, a few curious glances flicked her way before quickly turning away, as if nothing had happened. Aaliyah tried to stay calm, silently wiping the mess off her books. Each small, mundane action felt like it was tearing her apart. She had never felt so alone and powerless. From a distance, Emma observed Aaliyah, a cruel, satisfied look on her face. Emma understood the power of these seemingly small but constant, relentless actions. They could break someone without needing any public confrontation. This was the method she had used many times before, and she was sure it would work again. When the school day ended, Aaliyah practically ran out of the classroom. She hurried outside, her steps quick, her eyes full of panic. She just wanted to leave this place as fast as possible. Sitting in the car with her mom, she remained silent, staring out the window, not wanting her mother to know what had happened. When they arrived home, Aaliyah went straight to her room, sat down on the floor, and tried to breathe deeply to calm herself. The tears she had fought to hold back all day now fell, flowing like a small stream. She wondered what she had done wrong to deserve such cruelty, but there was no answer to her question, only the cold silence of the four walls around her. Looking up at the sky through her small window, Aaliyah whispered a promise to herself. I won't let them win this easily. I have to be stronger. Dad taught me that. She wiped away her tears, trying to regain her composure. But what she didn't know was that today's cruel prank was just the beginning, and the days ahead would be even harsher. Emma Pierce and her group had no intention of stopping, because for them, the game had only just begun. The following days, each morning for Aaliyah became a fierce internal struggle. Despite her efforts to remain strong, the small events chipped away at her courage, piece by piece. And just when she thought she was starting to get used to the whispers from Emma and Chloe, another, even more terrifying figure appeared, shaking everything up. Brandon Pierce, Emma's older brother, the only son of the school principal, Richard Pierce, was someone no one dared to confront at school. Tall, handsome, and always carrying the smug look of someone standing atop a high pedestal, Brandon had never been subjected to any limits. In the small world of Asheville Middle School, he wielded an invisible power that made everyone both respect and fear him. For Brandon, no one could escape his control, and certainly not a quiet, closed-off girl like Aaliyah Carter. One Monday morning, as Aaliyah stood by her locker, an unsettling feeling ran down her spine. She slowly turned around, her heart nearly stopping, when she saw Brandon leaning casually against the locker opposite hers, his cold blue eyes staring straight at her with an unmistakable air of contempt. "Hey, new girl," Brandon spoke, his tone friendly but dripping with sarcasm. "Aren't you thinking of leaving soon? I think you realize this place isn't for you." Aaliyah could feel the chill emanating from his seemingly polite words. She swallowed hard, trying to keep her voice steady. "I just want to study in peace, Brandon." Brandon laughed, the sharp sound making Aaliyah flinch. Around her, a few other students started to pay attention but quickly turned away, not wanting to get involved. "You think this place will just leave you alone," Brandon sneered with a challenge in his voice. "Maybe you should rethink that. No one here wants you." With that, Brandon turned and walked away, leaving Aaliyah standing frozen, her mind overwhelmed by fear. She realized she had just encountered someone far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. From that day on, Brandon made sure to show up beside Aaliyah at the most unexpected times. Sometimes he would comment cruelly on the clothes she wore, other times mocking the way she spoke during class. His words weren't loud, but they were sharp and cold enough to cut deep into Aaliyah, causing her to become more and more withdrawn. Brandon knew that true power didn't lie in making a scene or being loud in front of others. His true menace lay in how he made his victims slowly crumble in silence, how he used his gaze and words like invisible knives, deep enough to hurt but leaving no visible marks. On another occasion, during recess, as Aaliyah was walking through the quiet corridor behind the library, Brandon suddenly stepped out from a hidden corner, blocking her path. Her heart raced as she tried to avoid his gaze, but couldn't. "Don't think staying silent will keep you safe," Brandon said softly but clearly, his eyes cold as ice. "You're just prolonging your own suffering." Aaliyah lifted her eyes to look at Brandon, her voice trembling as she tried to sound strong. "Why do you hate me so much? I haven't done anything to you." Brandon shrugged, a cold smile playing at his lips. "You don't need to do anything. Just being here is enough to annoy me. I don't like people like you disrupting this place." Then he walked away, leaving Aaliyah standing still in the empty corridor. Brandon's cruel words echoed in her mind. Now, not only were the girls like Emma and Chloe against her, but even Brandon, the most powerful figure at the school, had become a terrifying presence in her life. That night, Aaliyah sat in her room, trembling as she recorded every detail into her small journal. Each line she wrote hurt, but she had to write it down, as a way to release the pain. "I know Brandon won't stop. I can see it in his eyes. He enjoys seeing me scared, enjoys seeing me weak, but I can't let him win this easily. I have to do something." She closed her journal and looked out the window at the silent night. She knew this battle was going to be long and difficult, but she couldn't let herself fall. Deep down, though, she knew that the toughest challenges were still ahead of her. Brandon Pierce and his wealthy friends had only just taken their first steps in their ruthless plan. Since that terrifying confrontation with Brandon Pierce, every day that Aaliyah went to school felt like stepping into an even fiercer psychological battle. The subtle threats, the cold stares, and the unrelenting isolation had made her withdraw further into herself. But for Brandon and his friends, it seemed that wasn't enough. Their malicious games had now begun to escalate in a new, far more terrifying and dangerous direction. One afternoon in English class, as Aaliyah was diligently taking notes from the board, Brandon subtly signaled to his friend sitting next to him. With just a quick, sharp flick of his hand, Aaliyah's stack of books was sent flying off her desk, crashing onto the floor with a loud thud, breaking the silence in the room completely. The entire class immediately turned their attention to Aaliyah, and a few suppressed chuckles rang out from the students sitting near Brandon. Aaliyah jumped, startled, and quickly bent down to gather her books, trying to hide the trembling in her small hands. Mr. Anderson, who was standing nearby and had seen everything, pretended not to notice and turned back to the board to continue writing. That cold silence from the teacher hurt Aaliyah even more than the cruel action itself. She realized she was being abandoned, left completely alone among these indifferent people. In pain and humiliation, she could only swallow her tears and continue picking up her scattered books from the floor. At the back of the classroom, Brandon sat with his arms crossed, his cold eyes watching every movement Aaliyah made. He didn't need to do anything more. A simple, chilling smirk was enough to send a clear message. Here, no one can help you. In the days that followed, the bullying continued to escalate dangerously. Aaliyah's school supplies mysteriously disappeared. Her books were scribbled on, and occasionally offensive words would appear on her locker door. What was even more terrifying was that the teachers and school staff maintained a suspicious silence, dismissing it all as trivial matters that didn't deserve attention. One lunchtime, when Aaliyah was standing alone near the back hallway of the library, trying to avoid the malicious gazes from the crowd, Brandon suddenly appeared behind her. Her heart pounded as she felt his cold breath brush past her ear. Brandon's voice quietly echoed, calm yet threatening. "You should be grateful we haven't done anything worse yet." Aaliyah froze in place, her legs almost giving way beneath her. She couldn't dare turn around to face him, the fear crawling through her body, choking her small heart. Brandon continued, his voice even softer this time, just loud enough for her to hear. "You'd better leave here before things get worse. I'm sure you understand what I mean." With that, Brandon walked away, leaving Aaliyah standing still in the empty hallway. His words echoed in her mind, again and again, like invisible knives, making her feel like she might burst into tears right there. She realized that Brandon wasn't just having fun with these cruel pranks anymore. He truly wanted to hurt her, to break her completely. At home, Aaliyah couldn't bring herself to tell her mother anything. Monica was too busy with work, and Aaliyah didn't want to make her worry even more. But when she shut the door to her room, the tears she had fought to hold back all day flowed freely. She buried her face in her pillow, silently wondering how much longer she could keep enduring this. Meanwhile, across town, Brandon and his wealthy friends were gathering at their usual upscale cafe. He sat comfortably in the corner, his cold, arrogant eyes still holding that familiar detached expression, sipping his iced coffee as he spoke slowly to the attentive friends around him. "That girl will disappear soon. No one can last long when treated like this." Emma, sitting next to Brandon, smiled with a self-satisfied grin. For her and her brother, removing people like Aaliyah from their little world was just a matter of time. No need for violence, just words, cold stares, and the silence of those around them. This was enough to make anyone feel like life was unbearable. Aaliyah had never felt so alone and helpless. Every night she lay awake, wondering if she could continue being strong the next day. She knew that Brandon Pierce wasn't playing games, and his words were the painful truth. But what Aaliyah didn't know was that Brandon hadn't stopped yet. The actions he had taken so far were only the beginning of a far more terrifying plan, a plan to completely destroy her spirit, making sure she could never stand up again. A new nightmare was quietly approaching, becoming clearer with each passing day. As the days passed, each school hour seemed to stretch endlessly, and each dismissal became a small escape for Aaliyah. But what she didn't know was that the nightmare she had been living through was far from its peak. Brandon Pierce and his friends were quietly preparing a new plan, a plan that would plunge the small girl into a panic she had never experienced before. That afternoon, the sky over Asheville was gloomy. Thick clouds covered the sky, and the rain fell steadily, adding to the somber atmosphere. After the final bell, as Aaliyah stepped out into the empty hallway to head home, she immediately sensed something was off. The dim hallway lights seemed to foreshadow something bad about to happen. Her footsteps faltered when she saw Brandon leaning against the corner wall, his cold blue eyes fixed on her, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Hey, new girl." Brandon said slowly, his calm voice sending a chill down Aaliyah's spine. "I guess you've gotten used to this place by now?" Aaliyah didn't respond, her heart pounding louder than ever. She tried to quicken her pace to escape Brandon's gaze, but just then, hurried footsteps sounded behind her. Before she could turn around, she felt a strong push that sent her stumbling forward. "Aaliyah, come on in!" Brandon's voice rang out from behind her, full of malice and coldness. Aaliyah staggered, her small body thrust into a narrow storage room at the end of the hallway, a dark, musty cleaning closet. Before she could react, the metal door slammed shut with a loud bang, locking tightly from the outside. Panicked, the small girl slammed her hands against the cold steel door, her voice choked with fear and desperation. "Brandon, open the door! Please don't do this to me!" But from outside came the faint sound of laughter, full of satisfaction. Brandon and his friends stood there, enjoying each other's company as they reveled in Aaliyah's terror, as though this was all just a harmless joke. "Stay there and think about it," Brandon called out, his tone calm yet terrifying. "Maybe this time you'll understand where you truly belong." The footsteps faded away, leaving Aaliyah alone with nothing but the eerie silence and cold darkness surrounding her. She screamed for help with all her might, but the hallway was empty, and no one could hear her cries. Each second passed slowly, like a knife slicing into Aaliyah's mind. The cramped storage room was thick with the smell of cleaning chemicals and mold. She huddled in the corner, hugging her knees tightly, tears streaming down her face. She tried to stay calm, telling herself that someone would come to help. But time kept slipping by in vain. The rain outside continued to fall, cold and indifferent, just like the school itself. No one cared where she was or how she felt. Brandon, standing outside the school grounds, casually leaned against the wall, talking to his friends while glancing toward the storage room in the distance. His eyes held a satisfied, malicious gleam. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he also knew that no one would dare report him, not here, where he was the principal's son, the one with supreme power in this small world. "You think she's scared?" one of Brandon's friends asked, grinning with delight. "Of course," Brandon answered coldly. "I want her to remember this feeling. Maybe next time she'll know her place." Meanwhile, every minute felt like an endless torment for Aaliyah. She grew weaker, her voice fading, unable to shout any louder. The thought that no one would come to help her made her feel more hopeless than ever. It wasn't until the sky had darkened that the door to the storage room suddenly swung open. Standing in front of her was Mrs. Jenkins, an elderly janitor with kind eyes, looking at her with horror and sympathy. "Oh my goodness, what are you doing in here?" Mrs. Jenkins asked in panic, quickly helping the trembling girl out of the room. Aaliyah didn't answer. She just shook her head and broke down, sobbing uncontrollably as tears streamed down her small face. Mrs. Jenkins hugged her shoulders gently, offering soft comfort. "It's okay now, you're okay. I'll help you." But Aaliyah knew that nothing was okay. What had happened that day had forever changed her. A deep, unhealable wound had been created in her young soul. Exhausted, she silently walked to her room, closed the door, and curled up in the darkness. Her red-rimmed eyes stared out the window, gazing into the distant emptiness. Her heart was broken, but now, deep inside, there was a rising, fierce determination. "I can't keep enduring this. I have to do something to end it all." But what Aaliyah didn't know was that the moment she decided to seek help, a true, powerful figure, her father, FBI Senior Agent James Carter, would enter this battle, completely upending the cruel game that Brandon Pierce and his friends thought they controlled absolutely. The small room sank into the quiet darkness, but Aaliyah's mind could not find peace. The horrifying images from the storage room earlier today haunted her, making her heart tighten every time she closed her eyes. She had never felt this helpless and desperate before. But in that very moment, amid the pain and fear overwhelming her, the image of a strong man suddenly became clear in her mind. Her father, James Carter, who always told her that she was never alone. Aaliyah sat up abruptly, her small hands trembling as she grabbed her phone. She stared at the faintly lit screen, her finger hesitating before pressing the name of the one person she knew she could trust completely in this moment. Taking a deep breath, she made the call. The ringing on the other end felt endless, only adding to her nervousness. Finally, the familiar steady voice of her father came through clearly. "Aaliyah, are you okay?" Hearing his voice, the tears she had tried to hold back all evening suddenly flowed freely. Her voice choked with sobs, trembling but trying to stay calm enough to explain, "Dad, I can't take it anymore. Brandon and his friends, they're bullying me so cruelly. Today, they locked me in a storage room for hours. I was so scared, Dad." There was a moment of silence on the other end, followed only by the sound of steady, calm breathing. James Carter didn't raise his voice in anger, didn't start a barrage of questions, but his tone was resolute, carrying the strength of a senior FBI agent. "I understand, Aaliyah. You don't need to say more. I'll handle this." His simple words, full of power, reassured Aaliyah more than anything else. He didn't need any more details because he understood everything she hadn't said. James Carter was a man who never allowed anything to harm his family, especially his daughter. Meanwhile, in a secret office hundreds of miles away from Asheville, James Carter slowly set the phone down on his desk. His usual calm expression was now replaced by one of cold, decisive resolve. To him, the brief words from his daughter were enough to understand the severity of the situation. She had endured too much for too long, and now it was time for him to take action. Senior FBI agent James Carter opened his personal laptop, his strong fingers quickly typing on the keyboard. On the screen appeared detailed information about Brandon Pierce, the son of the principal of Asheville Middle School. He read through the information quietly, his sharp eyes pausing on the photo of Brandon with his family. The young man's confident, arrogant gaze was a familiar expression, one James had encountered many times before in previous cases. James Carter understood the nature of people like Brandon, those who used their family's power to bully, manipulate, and oppress others. He knew exactly what he was dealing with, and he knew exactly what to do next. He quickly dialed his close colleague at the agency. "I need you to prepare a trip to Asheville first thing tomorrow, as quickly and discreetly as possible. I'll explain the details later." On the other end, his colleague responded simply and clearly, "Understood, Agent Carter. I'll make arrangements." James hung up the phone, his gaze drifting out the window into the dark night. He didn't need to make a scene, didn't need to be loud to assert his power. He knew that true power lay in the ability to protect his loved ones quietly and effectively. He gently placed a photo of Aaliyah on his desk, his eyes softening for a moment as he looked at her bright, smiling face. "I won't let anyone hurt you again," he said softly, as a firm promise. Meanwhile, in Asheville, Brandon Pierce lay casually on his bed, scrolling through messages from his friends, congratulating him on today's prank. He had never thought there would be any consequences for him. From childhood, Brandon had always been sheltered, always protected by the power of his father. Richard Pierce, the influential and respected principal of the school. But what Brandon didn't know was that a short phone call, one he never expected, had just been made, and a storm was quietly forming, growing stronger and ready to sweep away everything he took pride in. In the small room, Aaliyah finally felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in weeks. She closed her eyes and drifted into sleep, believing deeply that her father would never let her down. She didn't know exactly what her father would do, but deep in her heart, she knew he would never let anyone hurt his daughter again. What both Aaliyah and Brandon didn't realize was that the bold decision she had made to seek help had just triggered a series of unexpected events. A real battle for justice was about to begin, and this time, those who thought they had unlimited power, like Brandon Pierce, would face someone they never imagined. A senior FBI agent named James Carter was on his way to Asheville, and this time, he would make those who had harmed his daughter understand the true power of justice. The next morning, as the first light of dawn broke over the sky in Washington, James Carter was already at the FBI headquarters. His gaze was cold, his face calm as usual, but inside him, a fire of determination burned fiercely. After the phone call the night before, he understood that the time had come for him to take direct action and end the suffering Aaliyah had been enduring. James Carter was not just any ordinary FBI agent. Within the agency, he was known by the code name Agent 7, the one who ran special operations and handled the most sensitive situations. Throughout his career, spanning over 2 decades, he had faced numerous dangerous criminals and powerful underground organizations. But today, for the first time, he had to confront a personal battle, protecting his daughter. In his private office, Carter gently opened a special file labeled Protocol 42. This was a top-secret FBI protocol used in situations that required discreet but decisive intervention, especially when involving the family members of senior agents. He knew that what he was doing wasn't about flaunting power, but about ensuring that his daughter would never have to live in fear again. A few moments later, the young agent Michael Evans, Carter's closest colleague, entered the room after being summoned. Michael immediately noticed the gravity on his superior's face. "What do you need me to do, Agent Carter?" he asked. James Carter stood up, slowly walking toward the large window, his gaze looking far off toward Asheville, where his daughter was enduring her suffering. "I need you to help me prepare for Protocol 42. We're going to Asheville this morning. I want everything to be as quiet and discreet as possible." Michael was slightly taken aback when he heard the code name Protocol 42. He knew exactly how serious this was. This protocol was never activated unless the situation had reached a critical level. Michael nodded solemnly. "I understand, Agent Carter. I'll make the arrangements right away." Preparations were immediately set in motion. A helicopter without any identifying markings was dispatched, with a carefully selected pilot, ready to take them to Asheville in complete secrecy. Only James and Michael knew the true reason for the trip. Before leaving the office, Carter took a moment to glance at the small photo of Aaliyah on his desk. He reminded himself that he had allowed his daughter to handle this situation for too long. He had been watching from afar, trusting that the strength he had taught her would help her overcome. But now, with everything spiraling out of control, he could no longer stand by. In Asheville, Brandon Pierce continued to live out his arrogant days. That morning, he walked into school with a smug expression. After locking Aaliyah in the storage room, Brandon felt that his power had never been greater. He was confident that no one would dare stand up to him, especially since his father, Richard Pierce, the principal of the school, was always there to shield him from any consequences. As Brandon and his friends sat in the schoolyard discussing their next game plan, Emma grinned with self-satisfaction. "You see, Brandon, She's probably about to give up. No one can last long under this kind of pressure. Brandon smirked, his voice full of confidence but cold. I can do even more than this, Emma. She needs to understand that this place belongs to us. But what Brandon didn't know was that, at the very moment he spoke those self-assured words, a black helicopter with no markings had taken off, heading towards Asheville at high speed. Inside the helicopter sat James Carter, the seasoned agent with sharp eyes, quietly calculating his next steps to end Brandon's arrogant behavior and the indifference of the school. Inside the helicopter, Michael turned to James and asked quietly, "What are you planning to do when we get there?" James kept his eyes fixed straight ahead, his gaze cold but calm. "I'll show them that no one can hurt my daughter without paying the price, but I'll do it quietly, without fanfare. What matters isn't showing power. It's ensuring that this will never happen again." James knew that he was about to step into a confrontation that wasn't just personal. This was a battle between justice and injustice, between the false power of Brandon Pierce and the true strength of a father protecting his daughter. And he also knew that his presence in Asheville would not only make Brandon Pierce fear for his safety, but also shake the very foundations of the distorted values upheld by the school and those who silently supported Brandon. The helicopter sped towards Asheville, bringing with it a man who was ready to do whatever it took to protect his daughter. And this time, Brandon Pierce would have to face a truth he never expected. Aaliyah Carter was not just a weak girl easily bullied. She was the daughter of James Carter, Agent 7, and when he decided to act, he would never fail. In just a few minutes, Brandon and the entire Asheville Middle School would know this. And from here on, nothing would ever be the same. The black helicopter without markings descended lower into the Asheville sky, its powerful engine shaking the stillness of the school's surroundings. Students and teachers who were on their lunch break immediately looked up in astonishment, completely bewildered by what was happening. Everyone stood frozen, watching the rare spectacle unfold before their eyes. In the middle of the schoolyard, the helicopter landed with perfect precision. The wind from the blades was so strong that it blew leaves off the trees, causing everyone to shield their faces with their hands. As the helicopter door opened, all the students and teachers instinctively stepped back, a mixture of curiosity and fear in their eyes. The first person to step out of the helicopter was Agent Michael Evans, tall and dressed in a black suit, his stern eyes scanning the surroundings before quickly stepping to the side. And then, the main figure appeared, James Carter. His face was as cold as ice, his sharp eyes fixed straight ahead as he slowly stepped down, exuding authority with every deliberate stride. No uniform, no FBI insignia on his clothes, but the strength and confidence radiating from him made it immediately clear to anyone watching that this was no ordinary person. This was a figure of importance, someone whose mere presence made the entire schoolyard fall into a breathless silence. Among the crowd of students, Brandon Pierce stood frozen. The self-satisfied smile that usually adorned his face disappeared immediately, replaced by an expression of panic and confusion. Brandon had always been certain that his father's power, Principal Richard Pierce, was invincible. But now, standing in front of the cold, determined man approaching him, he felt for the first time what true threat felt like. Emma and Chloe, standing beside Brandon, immediately changed their expressions, exchanging fearful glances before looking back at Brandon as if searching for an explanation. But Brandon, at that moment, had no words. He stood rooted to the spot, struggling to swallow the rising panic in his chest. James Carter walked past each student and teacher who stood like statues, all instinctively stepping aside to create a path for him. No one dared speak, no one dared impede his powerful stride, because, at that moment, Everyone felt it clearly. He was not here to negotiate or make small talk. At the far end of the hallway near the schoolyard, Aaliyah had heard the noise and quickly rushed out. When she saw her father walking steadily toward her, her eyes filled with tears. She stood still, her small hands trembling as she clutched her book to her chest, her heart racing with a mixture of happiness and relief that she had never felt before. James stopped right in front of his daughter, his cold expression softening just enough for Aaliyah to notice. He gently placed a hand on her shoulder, his calm but warm voice resonating clearly in the absolute silence of the schoolyard. "I'm here, Aaliyah. No one will hurt you anymore." She nodded softly, tears silently streaming down her small face, but she didn't say a word. At that moment, the powerful and trustworthy presence of her father spoke volumes. Without another word, James turned to Michael, signaling him to quickly head toward the principal's office. Without asking for directions, he walked confidently, as though he had known the layout of the school for years. In reality, he had been quietly monitoring every detail, every development in his daughter's life for a long time. When James entered the principal's office, Richard Pierce, the man who had always prided himself on his power and position, stood up in confusion and evident anxiety. "May I ask who you are? And why are you causing such a disturbance in my school?" James pulled a small identification card from his jacket pocket and placed it on the desk with a gentle yet decisive motion. "I'm James Carter, Senior FBI Agent, Special Operations Unit with the code name Agent 7. I believe you know why I'm here." Richard Pierce stared at the badge on the desk, his face turning pale with fear. For the first time in his life, he realized he had severely underestimated the man standing before him. For the first time, he understood that real power didn't lie in the titles or the hollow positions he held, but in the ability to protect his loved ones absolutely, something James Carter was clearly demonstrating before his very eyes. Outside the office, Brandon stood motionless, staring toward his father's office, his heart filled with fear and unease. He knew that the authoritative and decisive presence of the man approaching wasn't just an act of intimidation. This was a clear sign that his days of abusing power and bullying the vulnerable were coming to an end. And this time, Brandon Pierce would have to face a real force that he had never imagined. A force from a father who was willing to do anything to protect his daughter. An FBI agent standing tall before his father, ready to deliver a clear and final message. Justice had arrived, and from this moment forward, everything would change forever. The atmosphere in the principal's office suddenly fell into a heavy silence, as if the very air itself could feel the pressure from the authoritative presence of James Carter. His cold, piercing gaze was fixed on Richard Pierce, causing the normally confident and arrogant principal to sit still, motionless in his chair. An intense tension filled the small room. Without saying a word, James Carter slowly opened the black leather briefcase in his hand, methodically pulling out several files and neatly placing them on the desk in front of Richard. The thin files contained a series of clear, damning evidence: photographs of the offensive writings on Aaliyah's desk, images of a defaced textbook, an audio recording of Brandon Pierce and his friends making cruel comments, and many other reports that had been meticulously gathered over time. James Carter looked directly at Richard, his voice steady yet cold, causing the principal to feel more paralyzed than ever before. "This is everything my daughter has been subjected to at your school. I want to know how a prestigious educational institution, run by someone responsible like you, could allow these things to happen." Richard Pierce, who had tried to maintain his composure at first, now appeared completely pale. His hands shook as he picked up the photographs, his eyes wide in shock and anxiety. He had never truly considered that the seemingly small acts of bullying could have been so thoroughly documented. I had no idea about this," Richard stammered, his voice weak and hesitant. "We've always tried to maintain a safe school environment." James immediately interrupted, his eyes growing sharper. "You had no idea? Or did you simply choose not to know? Your son, Brandon Pierce, is the ringleader of these actions, and I believe you know that very well, but you chose silence. You chose to let my daughter face these severe abuses." Richard hastily shook his head, weakly trying to justify himself. "I assure you, Brandon isn't a bad kid. Perhaps it's just a series of misunderstandings. We can handle this more gently, can't we?" James Carter didn't blink, his voice growing more firm and resolute. "Gently? You think this is just a simple misunderstanding? Have you ever put yourself in my daughter's shoes, locked in a dark room for hours, terrified and desperate? I'm not here to ask for your explanations. I'm here to demand that you take responsibility for what's happened in this school." Richard Pierce had no more excuses left. His face was ashen, his hands trembling uncontrollably on the desk. For the first time in his life, he was confronted with a painful truth, that his power and reputation weren't enough to cover up the truth forever. Outside, Brandon stood against the hallway wall, eavesdropping on the tense exchange between his father and James Carter. His face turned pale, his legs frozen as he listened to the sharp, direct words from the imposing man he had never thought he'd have to face. Brandon had never imagined that one day he would have to confront such a clear and harsh consequence. Emma and Chloe, standing not far away, were also stunned. Both of them no longer had any confidence, merely exchanging worried glances, realizing that the cruel prank they had participated in had now become a serious issue beyond their control. Back in the office, James Carter slowly stood up, his eyes still locked on Richard. His voice rang out sternly. "I don't need you to make any promises. I need concrete action, and I need it immediately. I want you to understand one thing. This isn't just a personal matter. This is about responsibility, ethics, and justice. And if you don't take this seriously, the FBI will intervene, and the consequences will not be as simple as today." Richard Pierce swallowed hard, unable to speak. James adjusted his suit, then turned and walked toward the door. Before leaving, he looked back one last time, his cold eyes piercing Richard. "My daughter will never have to endure anything like this again. You should be prepared, because I won't allow it to happen again." James stepped out of the principal's office, leaving behind an atmosphere thick with tension and unease. Richard sat alone, his shoulders slumped, his lifeless eyes staring at the pile of evidence on the desk, testimony to his irresponsibility and the grave consequences of the power he once thought was invincible. From this moment on, Richard Pierce and Brandon would both understand one thing. When justice speaks, power and position are no longer a safe haven. FBI senior agent James Carter had arrived, and he would not let anyone evade responsibility so easily. The following days at Asheville Middle School would certainly change forever, and this time the truth would be fully exposed, no matter how painful and difficult it might be to accept. The door to the principal's office closed behind James Carter with a definitive click, but his words continued to echo, shaking Richard Pierce to his core. The principal, once full of authority, was now reduced to the image of a man defeated, his shoulders trembling with deep shame and failure. Richard tried to speak again, his voice trembling, searching for a final justification for his actions. I never thought things would escalate this far, Agent Carter. I'm truly sorry." But before he could finish his sentence, James's sharp, cold gaze landed on his face, and his voice rang out, clear and cutting, each word a knife that dug into Richard's conscience. You knew exactly what was happening, but chose to remain silent. This is the consequence of that choice. Richard couldn't utter another word. He knew full well that, this time, he had lost all control of the situation. The power he once held, the position he had once been so proud of, now all meaningless in the face of the cold, determined strength of the man standing before him. James turned, his gaze softening briefly when he saw Aaliyah waiting for him outside the hallway. He walked towards her, placing a firm and warm hand on her shoulder, as if to say, from this moment on, you are no longer alone. Aaliyah, let's go home. James's voice was gentle, yet clear and firm. She nodded, her eyes brimming with tears, but for the first time, they were not tears of despair. Instead, they were tears of relief and happiness she had never known before. In her heart, there was now a sense of absolute safety, the very thing she had thought she had lost the moment she stepped foot into that school. As father and daughter stepped out of the office, the bustling hallway fell into an eerie silence. Students and teachers pressed themselves against the walls, all silently watching as the two of them walked past. No one dared speak, no one dared make a comment or mock them. The power of James Carter's decisive actions had completely shifted the atmosphere. Brandon stood in the crowd, his face pale, his hands clenched in helplessness. For the first time in his life, he felt what it was like to be truly defeated. The power and arrogance he'd once taken pride in now seemed meaningless in the face of the real strength of the man who had just passed by him. Brandon looked after Aaliyah, a sense of regret rising within him, deep and overwhelming. He realized that the harmless pranks he once thought were just fun had now led to consequences this serious. Emma and Chloe, standing not far behind, were also left in stunned silence. Neither of them had any confidence left. They exchanged worried glances, realizing that the cruel joke they had participated in had turned into a serious issue beyond their control. The admiring and fearful looks they once received were now replaced with caution and distance. Back in the office, James Carter stood up slowly, his eyes still fixed on Richard, his voice ringing out with authority. I don't need you to make any promises. I need concrete action, and I need it now. I want you to understand one thing. This is not just a personal matter. This is about responsibility, ethics, and justice. And if you don't handle this properly, the FBI will intervene, and the consequences won't be as simple as today. Richard Pierce swallowed hard, completely unable to speak. James adjusted his suit and then turned to leave. Before walking out, he glanced back one last time, his cold eyes meeting Richard's. My daughter will never have to endure anything like this again. You should be prepared, because I won't tolerate this a second time. James stepped out of the principal's office, leaving behind a suffocating, tense atmosphere. Richard remained seated, shoulders slumped, his lifeless eyes staring at the piles of evidence on the desk, proof of his irresponsibility and the severe consequences of the power he once thought was absolute. From this moment on, Richard Pierce and Brandon would both understand one thing. When justice speaks, power and position are no longer a safe haven. FBI senior agent James Carter had arrived, and he would not let anyone escape responsibility so easily. The following days at Asheville Middle School would certainly change forever, and this time, the truth would be fully exposed, no matter how painful or difficult it was to accept. As the black helicopter swiftly departed the school grounds, it left behind a completely transformed Asheville Middle School. No one spoke a word, but everyone understood that from the moment FBI agent James Carter had stepped onto the campus, nothing would ever be the same again. James sat beside Aaliyah in the helicopter, glancing at his daughter and gently speaking. "From now on, no one will hurt you anymore, Aaliyah. That's a promise from Dad." Aaliyah looked at her father, her eyes full of gratitude and emotion, and she softly responded, "I know, Dad. Thank you so much for believing in me and protecting me." James gently embraced his daughter, knowing that while he had intervened this time, the most important thing was that his daughter had learned an invaluable lesson about courage, her own self-worth, and most of all, true justice. Back at Asheville Middle School, Principal Richard Pierce walked out of his office and immediately called for an emergency meeting with all the teachers and staff. His voice trembled, but there was determination in it. "I declare that from today on, the school will implement a strict policy against bullying. Anyone who violates this policy will be dealt with clearly and seriously. Today's events are a painful lesson we must remember and ensure never happens again." The teachers silently nodded, understanding that these were no longer empty words. This was the result of a direct and decisive intervention by a father determined to protect his daughter. And from this point forward, Brandon Pierce and his friends knew one thing clearly. They had lost the false privileges and power they once thought they possessed. True justice had been served, quietly, without fanfare, but effectively and powerfully. Today, Asheville Middle School had officially changed forever, because one man, James Carter, had chosen to stand up for truth and justice, making one thing very clear: no one has the right to harm others without facing consequences. The next morning, as the gentle sunlight bathed the familiar hallways of Asheville Middle School, the atmosphere felt entirely different. The usual loud chatter and laughter had suddenly quieted, and the scrutinizing glances had vanished, replaced by a cautious, wary silence that seemed to cover everything. Aaliyah walked through the school gates with a strange feeling. For the first time since she had set foot in this place, she no longer felt the usual anxiety or apprehension. The way the students looked at her had changed distinctly. They avoided her, not with mockery or contempt, but with respect and fear. Brandon Pierce, the figure who once made her tremble at his presence, was conspicuously absent. His desk was empty, and no one mentioned the reason, but everyone knew he wouldn't be showing up anytime soon. Those who had once colluded with Brandon, like Emma and Chloe, were unusually silent, quickly looking away when passing by Aaliyah, as if trying to avoid the gaze of the small girl they had once dismissed. In the classrooms, teachers began the day's lessons with clear reminders about anti-bullying efforts. Mr. Anderson, who had previously turned a blind eye to the malicious actions against Aaliyah, now stood before the class with a tone that was uncharacteristically serious and sincere. "From today on, we will never tolerate any form of bullying. If any of you encounter any issues, don't hesitate to speak to the teachers or the school. This is a safe space, and I promise you we will always listen and protect you." Across the hallways, posters with clear and powerful anti-bullying messages were displayed everywhere, making a strong statement. Phrases like, "Silence in the face of evil is complicity," and "Strength is not to bully, but to protect the weak," were prominently displayed, reminding every student of their responsibility and the value of compassion. In the corner of the library where Aaliyah usually sat alone in isolation, a few classmates cautiously approached her for the first time. A small girl with neatly tied brown hair hesitated before walking up and gently placing a book next to Aaliyah's, speaking softly. "Aaliyah, would you mind if I sit here with you?" Aaliyah looked up, her eyes wide but quickly softening. A rare, sincere smile appeared on her face, and she nodded appreciatively. "Of course, I'd be happy to." In that moment, for the first time, Aaliyah truly felt the change in this place. Not just the actions against bullying, but the sincere attitude of those around her. She understood that this was the true justice her father had brought. Quiet, without fanfare, but powerful and meaningful. Meanwhile, in the principal's office, Richard Pierce sat in silence, in a room that was once full of authority but now felt colder and emptier than ever before. In front of him lay a stack of parent letters and numerous emails from the school board, demanding he give an official explanation for the recent events. The power he once held, the position he had once been proud of, now shattered like a hollow dream. Richard took a deep breath, picking up his pen to begin writing his resignation letter. He knew it was the final responsibility he had to carry out, the price he had to pay for the silence and indifference he had chosen for so long. Elsewhere, Brandon Pierce sat alone in a dark room, his eyes lifeless as he stared out the window. The sharp words from James Carter and the hurt look in Aaliyah's eyes kept repeating in his mind, like knives carving deep into his misplaced pride and arrogance. Brandon knew that he had lost so much: his friends' trust, respect from the teachers, and the false power he had once believed would last forever. Emma and Chloe were no better off. The two girls, once so confident and arrogant, now avoided the gazes of their peers, walking with their heads down in clear shame. This was the first time they truly understood the serious consequences of their actions. In the teacher's lounge, Vice Principal Caroline stood before all the teachers and staff, her voice clear and stern. "I want us all to understand that the recent events are not just a lesson for the students, but a harsh reminder to us as well. From now on, the school will implement strict measures to ensure every student feels safe and respected. We cannot afford to make the same mistakes again." The teachers nodded silently, understanding that this wasn't just about responsibility, but also an opportunity to correct the mistakes of the past and create a healthier and truly safe learning environment. That afternoon, as the sunset gently enveloped Asheville Middle School, Aaliyah stood alone by the school gate, waiting for her father to pick her up. She looked around and smiled softly, realizing that the school had changed. Not just the place she had once feared, but now it was starting to become a place she could truly call home. Justice had been served, the consequences had been faced, and from now on, everything would change, completely and forever. Those, like Brandon, Emma, and Chloe, would always remember that no one could escape responsibility when they hurt others. And most importantly, Aaliyah was no longer alone. She had regained her respect, and more importantly, found her faith in justice and in herself. The gentle sunset bathed the small Carter family home, casting a warm glow over everything. From the porch, Aaliyah sat beside her father, her eyes quietly focused on the distant horizon, where the last rays of the day slowly disappeared behind the peaceful mountains. A feeling of relief and tranquility, one she hadn't experienced in a long time, now filled her heart. The past days had truly been difficult, but today, for the first time since moving to Asheville, Aaliyah could go to school without the fear that had haunted her. The once malicious gazes had softened, replaced by respect and sincerity. She was slowly and steadily integrating with new friends, and more importantly, she had found herself again. Aaliyah turned to look at her father, her wide eyes filled with curiosity and admiration. "Dad, there's something I've always wondered. Why didn't you publicly announce what happened to me? If you had, maybe more people would know, and they wouldn't dare do it again." James Carter was silent for a moment, his gaze softening as he looked at his daughter, and then he smiled gently. "Aaliyah, you don't need the whole world to know what happened. The most important thing isn't making everyone pay attention, but making sure there's someone who truly believes in you and is ready to act for you. Sometimes the greatest strength lies in silence. His words made Aaliyah's heart flutter. For the first time, she truly understood what her father was trying to convey. It wasn't about showmanship, it wasn't about loud voices in front of a crowd, but about decisive, quiet actions to protect the ones you love. This was the most valuable and powerful thing. Aaliyah rested her head on her father's shoulder, a smile of relief spreading across her face. "I understand now, Dad. Thank you for always trusting and protecting me." James gently patted her shoulder, his eyes looking out toward the distant horizon. "I'm just doing what I need to do. You deserve to be respected and protected. Never forget that." Meanwhile, in a dark corner of Asheville, Brandon Pierce sat alone, his eyes blankly staring out the window. Over the past few days, he had learned a painful lesson that no school could teach. Brandon understood that power and arrogance could never overcome true justice, the kind of justice that James Carter had brought in a silent but powerful way. Emma and Chloe were also gradually changing after the events. For the first time, the two once arrogant girls began to realize just how deeply their actions had hurt others. No longer seeking fame through bullying or mocking others, they now tried to integrate more sincerely and kindly. At Asheville Middle School, the changes were becoming more evident. Teachers, staff, and students together created a safe and healthy learning environment. The bullying, which had once been a nightmare for many, was now replaced by kind gestures and sincere encouraging smiles. Anti-bullying messages weren't just on bulletin boards but had become guiding principles in everyone's actions at the school. At home, under the gentle sunset, Aaliyah sat with her father, her mind completely at peace. She had learned an important lesson. Courage doesn't always require grand, loud actions, but sometimes it exists in quiet, steady belief in oneself. She took a deep breath, feeling the strength and pride rising in her chest. From now on, she knew that she would never have to bow her head to anyone again, because she had a father who was always ready to protect her. And more than that, she had found her own belief in her true worth. James Carter looked at his daughter, his eyes filled with pride and deep reassurance. He understood that his daughter had truly grown stronger through the experiences she had faced. What he did wasn't just about protecting her from harm, but about helping her realize that justice, faith, and true strength always begin from within. Tomorrow, when the sun rose again over Asheville, Aaliyah would walk into school with a completely new mindset. She would no longer be the victim of bullying, no longer the small, vulnerable girl who could easily be hurt. From this moment on, she would be strong, confident, and ready to face any challenge. She looked up at her father, smiling brightly. "I'll never forget what you've taught me, Dad. I'll live strong and always protect those who need help, just like you protected me." James gently squeezed her hand, his eyes warm and full of pride. "I know you can do it, Aaliyah. You're always stronger than you think." Father and daughter sat together in silence, listening to the soft sounds of the evening. This was the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter full of hope, strength, and a deep belief in oneself. And for Aaliyah, that was all she needed to continue walking steadfastly on her journey of growth. Through this story, we understand that true strength isn't found in power or spectacle, but in courage, trust, and the love of those around you. Sometimes, all it takes is one person who truly believes in you and acts on your behalf to change everything. Have you ever experienced or witnessed a similar story in your life? Share it with us in the comments below. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel to spread positive messages, making the world a better place. Thank you, and see you in the next video.